Welcome to RAIN, the Real Estate Investor Growth Network with your hostess, Jen Josey. Join like-minded real estate investors and accelerate your business towards greatness. You will hear step-by-step strategies for success, interviews with real estate rock stars, and we will dig deep into past projects where we bear it all, including the good, the bad, and some just plain ugly. So get excited. Here's the bestower of badassery herself, the real Jen Josey. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Jen Josey, creator of RAIN, the Real Estate Investor Growth Network. Whoop, whoop. On today's episode, we have a guest that will be sharing their badassery. But before we begin, here's today's badassery bestowment. A little badass gift to you. Today's topic is the top 5 rookie mistakes and how to avoid them. Every real estate investor starts somewhere, and let's be real, nobody's immune to a few bumps and bruises in the beginning. But the good news, you can dodge a lot of the rookie mistakes by learning from those who have been there, done that, and lived to tell the tale. Let's break down some of the most common pitfalls and how you can sidestep them like a seasoned pro. Here are 5 actionable tips to help you avoid rookie mistakes. Number 1, skipping the homework. Don't rush into a deal without doing your due diligence. Research the neighborhood, run the comps, and know your numbers inside and out. A little homework saves a lot of headaches later. Number 2, underestimating repair costs. It's easy to fall in love with a property and lowball the renovation budget. Always get multiple estimates and add a cushion for surprises because we all know there are surprises. Number 3, over leveraging yourself. And listen carefully. Taking on too much debt too soon can sink your investing dreams. Start small, keep your finances in check, and don't bet the farm on your first deal. Number 4, neglecting the power of networking. Trying to go at it alone is a fast track to frustration. Connect with other investors, contractors, and mentors. Your network is your secret weapon in this business. Number 5, ignoring exit strategies. Hope is not a plan. Always have more than one way out of a deal, whether it's selling, renting, or even refinancing. Flexibility keeps you in the game when things don't go as planned. So, Rain Nation, remember, mistakes are part of the journey, but you don't have to make them all yourself. Learn from others, stay humble, and keep leveling up your badassery. That's how you build a real estate business that lasts. Now on to today's episode of the Real Estate Investor Growth Network podcast. When it comes to real estate investing, there doesn't have to be a distinction between doing well and doing good. Enter Dave Holman, a mission-driven investor using real estate to solve problems and improve communities. After co-founding a multilingual bookstore in Bolivia right out of college, Dave brought his passion for positive impact into real estate, now co-owning 94 rental units in southern Maine. He's dedicated to helping investors, residents, and the planet through energy efficiency, syndications, and property management. Dave is also the author of 3 books, Youth Renewing the Countryside, Coffee Smuggler, and Cyberfire. It's my pleasure to have him on the show, so welcome Dave Holman. How are you?
Good, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We started chatting and I knew immediately I am really going to like this guy. So thank you for being here today. And so you all know I had a crown put on this morning. So if I'm talking weird or if a little drool comes down, just give me a shout out here, Dave. Just say, Jen. So tell us a little bit about you. You were in Bolivia. Give us a little background on Dave.
It's the traditional path. Everyone does it. I was in college, studying Spanish and Latin American history, politics, that kind of thing. I studied my final year in Bolivia, met a young woman that I started dating. And it worked out. We eventually got engaged, got married. We have 2 kids. We've moved up here. So, but I spent about 4 years down in Bolivia. We started
Wow.
that chain of bookstores and camping stores together. And before I knew it, I had 10 employees, 3 outlets, and no economic or business background whatsoever. I used to think that was for, rich, greedy people, et cetera. And then suddenly looked in the mirror and said, wait, that's me. I got to figure out how to do this properly. So we moved back to the US in '09. Not a great year for the job market. So I went back to college, got my MBA. Um, all I really needed to know was accounting. And that's what I would encourage everyone to study and learn is bookkeeping and accounting. And some of the best real estate investors I've met are the former CPAs. The cold-blooded number crunchers are really good at running investments many times. But yeah, that brought me up here. With my MBA, I got into the lucrative nonprofit world. I think my first salary was $32,000 a year. And I did that for 9 years, kind of worked my way up into fundraising for Bowdoin College. They call it development work, which is ironic because I'm now a developer. So I've gone from nonprofit development to for-profit development, completely different fields, but they share a lot in common. I mean, it is actually all about relationships and relationship-based networking. And I think that's something that almost every job, to do it well, you need to be friendly and a good networker and be able to build a reputation, in that field. And, I started real estate investing on the side when my wife got pregnant with our first child. And I realized that my non-profitability was going to hinder our family's ability to live a happy, healthy lifestyle in the ways that we wanted. So I decided that I would look into real estate. I'd never thought about it before, but there's that stereotype of the evil landlord or what have you. We're not always the best at cultivating our image in this industry, but what I'd learned about green building in college got me interested and said, I can make my own home, as green and efficient as I like. That's not going to change the world. But if people will pay me to do it to their apartments and I can make more money doing things that way, that's really interesting. And the math bears it out. And I think it's you're fighting a losing battle if you're using old technology
Yes.
at all turns. I mean, there's some things that are tried and true, but things like heat pumps are really changing the game when it comes to HVAC.
Yeah, that's where I want to go first in this conversation, but I want to back up a little bit talking about accounting. And I do think it is so very important in this industry. And if you're anything like me, I do not have any type of mathematical accounting bug inside of me. But what I did, Dave, I married an accountant. So I did the next best thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I did tell him at one point when we were talking about, this is totally going left turn here, but when we were paying our general contractors and stuff, and I'm like, I've always wanted to sleep with a general contractor, and thinking he'd say, which one? But he got his GC license as well. That's the trick that I have found with my husband, is just to say, I've always wanted to sleep with a real estate agent, and then he gets his real estate agent license. So
you got commissions.
Yes, exactly. All right, Dave, let's focus back on you. So you mentioned energy efficient moves in real estate, and you gave me some great talking points, which is what made me so excited to want to interview you. But you are a big advocate for energy efficiency in real estate, and you mentioned heat pumps. So what are some practical ways that investors can incorporate this into their business?
Yeah, great questions. A lot of times in multifamily buildings, the infrastructure is set up such that there's one heating system and the landlord is paying the bill. And it's often hard or just hasn't been done to bill that back to the different tenants. And so there's a huge incentive to reduce that bill. And there's a couple great ways to do that. One that's kind of boring and unsexy, but incredibly profitable and powerful is looking at insulation. Your money is flowing out through holes in your roof, basically. And if you go up there and air seal, all those roof penetrations, you put a good layer of cellulose or insulation up in that attic cap, which very few buildings built before the 90s will have good insulation. At best, it's going to be old crumpled fiberglass that the mice have been living in,
or asbestos. I mean, that was like a great insulator.
Yeah, asbestos is a miracle material. If it didn't kill us, it'd be awesome. And if it's inert and not getting friction to it, it's fine. And
Right.
sometimes leaving it in place is the responsible thing to do. But with a lot of buildings, blowing in cellulose insulation, if it doesn't have any, or you can remove what's there, that'll save you like 30% or more on your heating and cooling bills, in those super hot and cold times a year. And that's real money. I mean, that's adding 20x every dollar you put into insulation into your next appraisal. If you're doing a cash out refi or a sale, I mean, that for a landlord is a huge, huge difference maker. And the best way to lower heating costs is to get rid of them entirely. And that is where heat pumps come in. So if I encounter, a multi-unit building that's old, it's got an old oil burning, system that was installed 30, 40 years ago, as soon as that thing needs a repair, or sometimes before, why throw good money after bad, limping along an ancient system that's going to need replacement? Why not preempt that by replacing it with, let's say on a 4-unit building, you're putting in 4 heat pumps, 1 in each apartment, and decommissioning the old oil boiler or gas burner in your basement. And that will allow residents to pay their own heating and cooling bills, which they're not going to be happy about, but you can negotiate, how that gets phased in with the good ones that you want to keep. And then they can keep it as hot or cold as they like. I visit buildings where the landlord's paying the bill, and often in February, the top windows will be open because they're warm, and that's how they handle it.
Ugh.
You don't get that if they're paying their own heating bill. And heat pumps give you cooling in the summer. It filters the air. It can dehumidify. And they're highly efficient compared to electric baseboard. They're about 3 times more efficient. And the nice thing about them, they're getting better every year. Like oil and gas, the burners are not improving. There's no, leapfrogging of that technology. It's done. It is what it is. Gas is better than oil, but those prices can spike. The fracking boom is ending in this country. And I think those prices are volatile. Electric, baseload electric, especially if you're in a good area in the country with a lot of generation, is much more stable. And I think that electric is the future. It's just undeniable that that is the direction that our heating and cooling systems are going. And so you can fight that trend, as long as you want. But ultimately, I think going along with it is very helpful. And it allows landlords to get a huge 5-figure energy bill off of their balance sheets.
Absolutely.
Long term.
And I also want to ask about windows, because I just interviewed a girlfriend of mine, and we live in, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, but she did a property in Durham, North Carolina, and it was a historic home. I've done a historic home as well in downtown Raleigh, and they make us, because it's a historic property, fix the old windows with the weights and everything. And it's just, to me, our electric bills were ridiculous because there's so many gaps in there.
Right.
Like, I honestly do not understand the purpose of keeping the old windows and not making it safe for my people who are staying there because they're heavy. But what do you have as far as windows with this whole energy efficiency?
Yeah, great question. There's sort of a hierarchy of like bang for your buck improvements with energy, and the air sealing around windows is very high on that list. A little bit of caulk might save you 100 times more than what the tube cost you each winter.
Exactly.
The R value of the windows, the insulative power of windows, that's pretty low on the return on investment list. You can get a $2,000 or $3,000 high performance, low E argon gas window to replace your single pane or maybe double pane, old leaky window. And you might save $5 or $10 a year. I'm just making up numbers, but it's not going to be a dramatic difference because windows are just not good at insulating, period, full stop. No matter whether they're high performance or low performance, their R values are all going to be like less than 10. And again, your attic is R60. That's incredibly high and good insulation. Heat rises, so as long as your window it doesn't have air gaps around it, your heat loss is not going to be dramatic, whether your window is a super expensive, nice one or the cheap, vinyl replacement window, style. That's my opinion. And as a landlord of kind of workforce housing and non-luxury apartments, I don't overspend on windows. I look for what is the sort of in stock, out of the box, low cost vinyl window. And even if it only lasts me 10 years, replacing 3 of those is still cheaper than going to your custom window maker and getting a really nice one.
Yeah, because I just remember our quad that we had in downtown Raleigh. Our electric bill is ridiculous, and I thought it was contributing to the windows, but it was literally the window in the frame. I couldn't just caulk around it. I'd have to keep it
Yeah.
caulk it shut, and you can't have that when you're running short-term rentals, and you need the emergency to exits.
Yeah, the historic districts, it's well intentioned, but it's often like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I'm a huge fan of historic preservation, but like you can make a new nice vinyl window look just
Right.
like the old one. Like no one knows that it's not wood inside the frame. And that wood, by the way, has layer upon layer of lead paint from the old ages on it. And
Yes.
some poor soul has to go and like sand those, and it's just not, it's not good. It should be going to the right landfill. You can give it a Viking funeral and we're done. But uh I don't like that kind of effort because it's highly costly, and people are like, oh, rents are so high, wow, wow, wow. Well, I just spent like thousands of dollars every single window to give you essentially a bad product that doesn't work as well as a new one. And I think we should preserve facades, we should preserve historic architecture. I'm so glad that places like Miami Beach and the historic downtown of any city that still has one got preserved. But like windows are not the hill that I think these committees should be dying on.
Thank
And
you.
I'm with you. I don't like the
Ugh,
windows. I'm okay. Like, okay, if it's, like a six frame, double hung, replace it with a six frame double hung. Like that's fine.
correct.
Okay, fair enough. Even though I think those are ugly and you should just be able to put in all glass. But um whatever. But
Right.
to dictate that you must use historic materials, which are often full of poison, it just bugs me. That's not cool.
Agreed. So the most bang for their buck for the listeners is insulation. Anything else as far as energy efficiency and the heat
Uh,
pumps? I'm sorry, heat pumps. My
yep.
bad.
Air sealing, it even comes before insulation. And I can't tell you how many like basements I've been into or attics I've been into where I'm like, oh, look, daylight.
Yes.
I bet in the winter that's bad. Like you don't want daylight coming in these places. I mean, the attics need to be vented, right? And so they're often, there's appropriate places for the daylight. You don't want it being visible like from your plumbing vents that are connected with your bathrooms and so forth. So the air sealing is really key. Rim joists in basements, that first couple feet above the frost line in a basement is a great place to put some insulation. There's pros and cons to spray foam, but certainly the air sealing in basements is a really low hanging fruit, high ROI, non-sexy kind of thing. But again, when landlords are paying the bills and just to prevent like pipe freezing and things of that during a cold snap, that can be really important.
Yep, we had to replace a pipe recently at our 12 unit because of freezing. So, agreed on that. All right, I want to move now to value add investing. So, you talk about finding B or C properties in A neighborhood. So, what is your process for identifying these opportunities and how do you figure out how much to invest in the upgrades? Because one of my topics for my badassery bestowment was the under budgeting. So how can we do it without over improving something?
Yeah. I think you want to think about what is necessary for safety or the operation of the building, and that's kind of a given, a bullet you got to bite, you got to do that. And what will drive rent and
Mm.
lower expenses. Those are the improvements that you look at first. And it's hard because I love making things pretty and nice but people might not pay for that. You're going to get your best returns, in kitchens and bathrooms of remodeling, renovating those as needed, but sometimes just painting the old cabinets and putting on new pulls, even though it's 10 times cheaper than putting in new cabinets, gets you 80% of the effect of that can look a lot
Right.
nicer. So, those are kind of interior design questions, to think about carefully. I love finding mom and pop landlords that are not running their operations in a professional way, like the people that listen to your podcast and are learning all of these black belt badassery tricks and strategies to drive NOI and drive value. So, mom and pop landlords don't watch their local rents. And by simply collecting that data, by looking at what are the trends in your rents, what's a 2-bed, 2-bath going for at this quality, at that quality, and that is so critical to know. because a lot of times people will underwrite an existing rent roll and they won't put the pro forma there. And my pro forma might be totally different from what that selling, realtor might think the pro forma should be, either to the high or low side of that. So always take with a huge grain of salt the data you're being given, by a seller when you're doing value add. Say, what's my play here? What am I going to do to this that's different? And a lot of times, like, someone might have an office. Well, that could be a bedroom if you put a door and a smoke alarm in it, in a lot of code contexts. So those are kind of hidden values to unlock, to look for, whether it's a single family or a multi-unit building.
That's what I was going to ask. Are you looking at single families or multifamilies or both?
I've gone a long way by being opportunistic. And
Okay.
I think that there's pros and cons to focusing on one niche and one specialty. And I think there's certainly, that saying, the riches are in the niches, and you can do well by doing that. That's just not me. I'm kind of a dabbler and I enjoy learning new things. And once I've kind of mastered something, I'm then usually ready to move on rather than do it my whole life. So I've been open to not saying where's the best 4-unit building because I can get residential financing and da 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 da. I'm saying where's the best, return on my investment, and where can I really do good? Because, like, I could make money owning gas stations, but, like, does that excite me and get me out of bed in the morning and make the world a better place? Like, in my opinion, no. So I'm mixing criteria. It's not all purely monetary, but I buy a lot of mixed use buildings, and most people hate those because it's not multifamily and it's not pure commercial, which is great. You just eliminated 90% of your competition. You are now fishing in a big pool against very other fishermen, because most people want either residential and they just poo-poo commercial, or vice versa. They want commercial and they poo-poo residential. And it's like two warring factions. And I love hearing them talk about, like, oh, I never want to deal with a tenant in a toilet. And others are like, oh my God, I can't handle those businesses and their picky needs or whatever. And to me, it's just, you're renting space for money. Tenants are tenants, and there's so much more in common than different between commercial and residential. And I've gotten some of the cheapest multifamily units by being willing to take on, the hair salon and the restaurant that were down below them, and understand those leases and those lease terms and what triple net means and those sort of things. And a lot of times those leases are badly mispriced, and that can be dangerous too. I almost bought a building where it had a 30-year lease that had 2% escalations in it. Well, guess what? Like, our market's been escalating at 12%. And, that is just a dangerously cheap rent for a long time for an anchor tenant to have. So, be very careful in negotiating long-term leases. It can come back to bite you. I mean, I think it's almost good that we had high inflation recently to wake everyone up to the fact that the longer that you fix a rent escalation, residential or commercial, the more risk you put yourself at of really underperforming the market. Because the data we get from the Fed, in my opinion, is not the full picture, and it doesn't reflect the rent growth. Like, I keep my own data of rents, I track them, and they're going up quick.
And how often do you raise rents?
Generally annually.
Okay.
But it's always a negotiation. If we're in a kind of soft market or it's a tricky space to fill and we've got a good tenant, I might keep it flat. I might give them some kind of discount. I think it really depends on, you've got to listen to your supply and demand. You've got to be really sensitive to that. And conversely, if you have 3 or 4 different people that would take an apartment, your price is too low. Like, you should have priced that a little higher, and you only want, 1 or 2 good people taking it at the end of the day. So those are signals, that I think property managers and landlords really need to pay attention to.
And I love that you brought up the whole mom and pop situation, because I asked you, how often do you raise rents? Because I got stuck in that, where I'm like, oh, we have such great tenants, and so we didn't raise rents like we should have been on top of that. But have you been hearing, because I'm hearing this buzz, that there's a lot of these boomers that are getting ready to sell off? There's your perfect mom and pop type situation. So are you seeing that up there in Maine, where their boomers are like, I'm over it, and the kids are like, I don't want that mess? So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity coming down the pike.
We invented that concept. Maine is the oldest state in the nation. We are proudly the most geriatric of states.
More than Florida?
Oh, we smoke Florida because they've got a lot of young.
I guess so.
Well,
yeah.
It has the reputation But the reality is our average age is over 43. I don't know if
My
Florida is in
goodness.
the 40s. So no, Maine has an older demographic, and we've been seeing this for a long time. But anywhere, it has less to do with the baby boom itself than like the average age of any seller anytime ever was always like older, because that's how long it takes people to accrue wealth, build a real estate portfolio, and be ready to then sell it. Most of those people are just going to be over 50 almost inherently, whether it was 50 years ago from now or 50 years in the future. But yes, baby boomers are very much the profile of the kind of buyers that you would want to look for. And they often have no debt on their buildings. They might have bought it for a tenth of what it's worth now. And thus they might not need or feel like they have to get the absolute top dollar. And if they're not studying the market and working with a realtor, they might be delighted with getting 10 or 20% less than what they probably could have gotten if they had done it scientifically. Again, love working with DIY mom and pop folks because, you can make mutually satisfying deals that are not reflective of market pricing.
And I also think there's an opportunity for the kids of the baby boomers because a lot of them don't want to deal with swapping out toilets and things like that, where you can do creative financing and offering that, saying, hey, you be the bank. I'm going to take over the project. What do you want per month? And I'll pay it directly to you. So there's just so much opportunity out there in that one little niche. Would you say the riches are in the niches?
Yeah.
I love that.
I heard that somewhere else. I'm not smart enough to invent it, but I do a fair amount of seller financing. I think it's one of those like, well, you won't get it if you don't ask. So ask.
Right. Yeah.
And I always ask early on, and a third of the time it's like, well, maybe, what's your offer kind of thing. 2/3 of the time, like, no, the seller wants their money. They want to walk away at closing. And the more you push them for that, the less they're going to like respect you and want to deal with you.
Yes.
So like, know when to push and when to just be like, oh, okay, I get it. You want to just sell. That's okay. But, right now I'm doing a deal where I'm getting about a third seller financing at a very favorable term, no payments for 2 years. There can be some very interesting creative things done with seller financing. The advice I would give to people starting out, many banks will allow you to pay as little as 10% down as long as you're getting at least 10% seller financing, because then the bank is still into it for 80%. They're at their 80% LTV, loan to value, ratio that they want to be at. And as long as the seller is okay being subordinate, in the number 2 position to the bank debt, which they usually are and understand, and that's normal, you can get a higher leverage, AKA better cash on cash return in most cases. You better make sure of that because the cost of capital is quite high right now. But I look for deals that can get at least 10% cash on cash, and the bigger the deal, the harder that is to achieve. As you get economies of scale, well, really 8% kind of becomes the gold standard, I think. But seller financing makes that easy to do, and it can be a win-win. And you can talk to the sellers about like taxes because they're deferring a large capital gain tax. Maybe that 10% helps them stay in a certain bracket that they would otherwise go over. So there can be real win-wins achieved by that, and you just have to ask.
And I have to give you credit, and because for the listeners out there, you said something so important because 1/3 of the people in the beginning, you want to start with that seller financing, and then 2/3 like, nope. And if you keep pushing it there, because there's so many gurus out there that are like seller financing only. And so I feel like people are missing out on deals. So know when to walk away, know when to run. So I love that you said that. Thank you for reinforcing that. I now want to switch gears to property management. So managing 94 units. Do you still have 94 units since this was written?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, I'm up to 360. So I gave you the wrong number. I'm sorry. I have to update it. And we've got 183 under construction. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Because our bios are ever changing. I just spoke at an event last night. I'm like, oops, I have 3 dogs now, not 2 in my entry bio. So, but what are some of the, as a property management, what are some best practices that you recommend for investors, landlords, tenants to keep things running smoothly?
Oh, great question. And this is part of it that I love that many people hate, which is all the better because I think there's a lot to be gained through property management. I've tried all 3 possible ways of doing it. I DIY'd it until I had 32 units and I had a full-time job, a day job at that point. And I was like, I'm trying to ride 2 horses with 1 ass and I need to pick a horse here. And then I inherited a property manager, and eventually I'm kind of an A student, or try to be, and they were getting C's and D's, and I was like, all right, let's upgrade. And so I switched my portfolio to what I thought was a more professional outfit. And then it still was just like, why is that unit still vacant? Like, why didn't you focus on this? And, no one's going to watch your thing like you will, kind of thing,
Right.
right? Which, I'm not saying third party management is always wrong. It works great for many people at all kinds of scales. But for me, I then started my own company, and I've grown that over the past 6 years. Team building is like one of my favorite parts of this business. And we now have 14 employees,
Wow.
managing, these units, and we have our maintenance team in-house that we used to always outsource. So that's been, a great joy and challenge, building that part of the business. But I think property management is risk management. And if you have good property management, whether it's your own or a third party, that helps you manage risk. And the less good your property management is, the more risk you incur, both vacancy risk of bad pricing, liability of safety. I mean, there's all kinds of risks that people, if they don't have their eyes on that ball, can incur. So I think it's a hugely important thing. And then I think I see our company as like a shoe store. I want us to be the service-oriented people down on our knees, helping our tenants put the shoes on, because they're paying my mortgages. They're paying my interest. They're helping me distribute to investors. Like, they are what's making this all possible. And if I treat them like crap, then, I'm just going to be another one of these landlords that has constant turnover and churn. And I love keeping tenants for many, many years at a time. I'm willing to be a few percentage points below market to do that, because
Okay.
turnover, people don't factor that in. But, we have very low vacancy rates, compared to averages. I've had tenants live their entire lives in units. I've only been a small part of that life, but we've kept tenants who've been there for multiple decades, and we call them residents, which is kind of a sign of respect that we try to give for the residential tenants, say our residents. And this resident, because they're not just an ATM machine. They're not just people that need to fork over money on the first every month. They're real people with real lives. And, we try to be, it's sort of like quick to hire, slow to hire, quick to fire. We're
Right.
careful picking our tenants. And we really try to put people in there that we're going to enjoy working with and are financially qualified, so that they won't, have problems and burnout in the future. And then if they start giving us problems, and being a huge headache, well, in Maine, you don't have to renew every year. We can move on from people that are not treating us with respect and being consistent in their behaviors and so forth. So I think it is a two-way street. It's not that we just have to put up with everything and be service all the time. I joke with people. I say the tenant, the customer is always right, except for when they're not. And our team members need to have judgment. I love hiring older people because they have that judgment. And I have nothing against, Gen Z and 20 something starting out. I wish them well, and I will hire them, obviously, but we have some now. But I think having a team that has good judgment, judge of character, good social skills, that is an intangible, but it's really key. Like, a lot of our managers used to be either social workers or psychiatrists, or they're analyzing people, they're working with people. And that's a really helpful skill to have in property management.
So, have you learned any hard lessons being a property manager?
Oh, every day. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of, basic things. And then there's things that you just never encounter. And part of what I love about this business is the stories you get from it. I think it's always a challenge to know how long to work with someone who needs help. And I've had residents who, have claimed to be sick, but really weren't. But I've had others that are sick and need help, and some leniency. And I'm not going to kick someone out because they have cancer and are going to miss their first rent payment because of that.
Right.
But I can't do that for 6 months. Like, we have to figure out a plan and a way to move forward that works for both sides. And usually that's doable, but it takes two to tango. And I think it's up to the resident to demonstrate that they're going to honor the commitment on their end, and will honor ours. And sometimes that means making a payment plan. Sometimes it's just, I'm giving you a little extra time to move than I have to. But I can see that this is never going to work. It never has, never will. And, I think you do have to learn, like you said, when to hold them, when to fold them when it comes to your residents. But other times, like I've helped a resident get over a hump. They've paid back every single cent of rent they've owed. We've taken it up each year since, and they've been a great resident after that. Where a lot of landlords, as soon as you miss a payment, I mean, I know ones that if the rent's late on the first, they give a notice to quit. And that's just their policy. And it's like, why are
Right.
we're just adding stress to the world for no reason. That's
Right.
what late fees are for. And there's a lot of other ways to get rent collected efficiently, but that's our style.
Well, I love all that. And I love that you call them residents. And I want to keep the focus for my next question here because you've been in this, could get political for the listeners, but you've been involved in placing new immigrants and asylum seekers into your units. How did you get started with that? And what advice do you have for other landlords who want to make a positive impact by providing a safe place for them to live?
Great question. I believe in the American dream. And what that means, stereotypically, is coming to this country with nothing, working your ass off, and building a life for you and your family. And I think that's the most bipartisan thing that, the left and right can probably even agree on right now, is that we should all believe in the American dream. We should try to make that possible. And what I love about being a landlord is like I've personally helped make that happen for dozens of families. And, some of them start in a homeless shelter because they arrived with nothing and they get, and they need a couple months of like general assistance, GA from a local city to pay their rent for them while they get their work permit. And as soon as they get that work permit, they're ineligible for GA. They're working their butts off at low paying jobs that, most longtime citizens like myself would not be willing to do. And it is one of the most win-win setups that I think we can have in our society. So, but by the same token, like if they're going to behave badly, like I will, this is a, completely equal opportunity, way to get kicked out of an apartment. If you're not going to follow the rules, I don't care if you're a new immigrant family with kids or if you're a grouchy old Mainer who's been here since the 1700s with your family. We treat you equally, and, you need to behave and play by the rules and demonstrate that you're going to try your best to make this work. And we'll do our best in that case as well. But there are a lot of programs out there, and it's not just for immigrants. There's programs that help abused women get their rent paid, getting back on their feet. There's religious programs, that'll help. We had a senior lady whose church helped her pay her rent after a spouse died. There's a lot of situations where the rent isn't coming from the income of that individual. And that's such a win-win where, you as a landlord can get like free money from the government and help someone who needs the help to get on their feet. Or just, some people, if they're senior citizen fixed income, like they need that Section 8. They're never going to be able to work a 40-hour job if they're disabled or something like that in certain ways. And just, I think being a landlord that's open to residents who don't fit the typical, credit and income profile is important. Like, do those always work out? No. And you have to use common sense. And I think there's a lot of challenges people have with addiction and substance abuse that make their residency impossible. So, we have bigger problems in our society that you as a landlord can't fix, but there are definitely opportunities where you as a landlord can get a family, out from living in their car or living in a hotel or living in a homeless shelter back on their feet. And that's like the critical part of that dream for them, whether it's the American dream of new immigrants or people that have been here for generations.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing that because I also agree everyone needs to start somewhere. And by providing a safe space for them to live, it's only improving our communities and the culture in the area. So thank you for doing that. One of our favorite tenants she's has a disability. And when we purchased this property, the gentleman had passed, but he was disabled and had all the bars, the security bars, the ramp going up. And then she was one of the first ones that came around and it was perfect fit for her. And she's been a lovely tenant, gosh, going on 5 or 6 years now. And, we're so grateful for her, but she doesn't pay most of her rent. It's paid for by the government for her disability. So definitely tons and tons of opportunity out there. And so I just want to thank you for being one of those amazing people. So last question here before we move to the second part of the podcast is we talk about passive investing versus active investing. And I don't think, Dave, you can convince me that there is truly a passive way of investing unless it's literally just giving someone your money and letting it sit there.
I
But
love a challenge. I'm going to convince you.
all right, so give me the pros and cons on passive investing and active investing.
Great question. I think to put it very simply, with active investing, you can get higher returns and you have control. With passive investing, you're inherently giving some percentage of those returns to other operators who are doing the work for you, and you don't have control. So those are the pros and cons. I do both, and I think it's great when you can do both. For some people, one will be much better than another. Like when I started out, I had no capital, no savings of my own. I couldn't be a passive investor. I had nothing to be passive with. I just had my time and my ability to learn. And I used that to learn how to make real estate investments. And I partnered, with a family member at Extra Retirement Funds, and they were the opposite. They did not want to be active. They had zero interest in being a landlord, but they recognized they needed to diversify their portfolio. They loved the idea of diversifying into real estate, and they were willing to give me a big chunk of that pie if I did all the work. And I think that dynamic can play out for every investor everywhere. And so you gotta see, like, if someone's listening to the show and they're a neurosurgeon, maybe stick with that and invest passively. You don't have to be, spending your limited free time with your family out like repairing a tenant's dysfunctional toilet.
Right.
And if you're someone who, is not going to be generating the kind of wealth through your W-2 job or your day job to be able to invest passively, then yeah, I think you're probably going to need to look more in the active realms of investing, which are, voluminous. There's flipping, wholesaling, buy and hold, you can be a broker. There's all kinds of things you can do to generate income, with real estate. So, but with passive investing, I mean, my own passive investors, they have to fill out a little bit of paperwork, and read the due diligence that we provided and decide if they're going to invest up front. That it takes some of them 5 minutes. Others might spend 5 hours. I mean, I would always encourage everyone to spend the time it takes to review things carefully. They write a check, they send it over, and then they receive quarterly updates and quarterly distributions. And that's pretty dang passive. I mean, there's very little work involved, for people that are what are called LPs, limited partners in a syndication kind of investment that most of your listeners probably know about. So that is, to me, passive investing. Yes, there's this idea of managing the manager and being proactive and checking it out. But the vast majority of my investors, they know me, they trust me, they want to work with me, and they really don't want to be looking over my shoulder and trying to check my homework all the time, as long as things are going well. And usually they are. But part of what I do, and I'd encourage everyone to do, is just be upfront and honest about when they're not going well. Like if we have a big unexpected capital expense, we have to pause distributions, and I might have to loan the LLC money to get through that unexpected expense. It happened twice recently when in Maine, we have historic buildings. The average age of our buildings is like 1840s. Woo. So we had, and it's like peeling an onion. If you open up a floor, well, then you might have to open a wall. You open the wall, then you might have to open the ceiling. And $100,000 later, you fixed it all. But, it's just unexpected and unfortunate. And it's the kind of thing insurance doesn't cover. So, you have to be prepared to handle the unexpected at the scale that you're at. And you have to be willing to put your own money in with that. Like, I've never done a capital call, and I hope I never will, because I think like I should fill that gap with it. And if investors want to join me in that, great, but they shouldn't be forced to. And I should do a good enough job at the outset that there's a margin of safety whereby we're not going to get ourselves in huge unexpected amounts of trouble. And that's why, I'm very discerning in what I take on. And I want to be able to pick investments that have a 99% chance of being a long-term good trip, for me and the passive investors that I'm working with.
Well, if the listeners are anything like me, they can see your true character showing through and the great things that you do. If the listeners want to maybe invest with you, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd love to be introduced to anyone interested in that. They can go to my website, holmanhomes.com. They can shoot me an email, dave@holmanhomes.com. They can even give me a call, 207-517-5700. And very few people ever call after episodes. So don't be shy, and I probably will be busy. You can leave a message and I will get back to you. And I'm happy to have an introduction chat. There's no harm in that. And I think I love meeting new people and learning new things.
And what opportunities do they have to work with you?
We have 3 projects on different burners of the stove right now. One, I'm about to send out the offering. That's a historic renovation project in a downtown in Maine where we're adding 8 workforce housing apartments into kind of disused space and a big, nice brick building. Another is a 183 unit apartment building syndication. It'll probably be ready this winter, but been working on for a year and a half, and it's at that simmering boil point now. It's very, very close, but those ones, a lot of inertia and momentum, and that takes time. And then I'm just starting the due diligence, hopefully today or tomorrow, and something getting under contract right in like an A+ location to redevelop part of a downtown. And that'll be super cool opportunity. But that one's probably 6 to 9 months off for a raise. So there's different timelines, different things. And I've been kind of slow with high rates. I've been focusing on operational excellence because it's harder to make deals pencil at 7%. But I just got an offer that was almost 6% even. So I'm excited to see some good rates.
Wow. Very nice. And it's holmanhomes.com. Is that what you said? And
Yep.
it's Holman for anyone who's listening without seeing his name on the screen here. So, Dave, thank you so much. We are going to move to the second part of the podcast here, which is what makes Dave Holman a badass, which clearly you are. And I use the acronym BADASS. And the first letter is B for book. And also for the people only listening, you are sitting between many books stacked all around you. So, what is one of those books that's made a huge difference in your life?
I promise not to say Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because it's a
That's the
cop-out.
purple Bible. That's what everyone says.
Yeah, I mean, I read it maybe a year into my real estate investing journey, and it's a great book, but I think there's lots of others out there that don't get their fair attention. And I'll give a couple ideas of things that are just way outside of people's usual reading habits. But Investment Biker, all about an investment banker that traveled all over the world on his motorcycle, but tons of great like entrepreneurial and investing stories in there that you might love. Cradle to Cradle by William McDonough, all about the green building side of real estate, how to make things either recyclable or compostable, in the long run.
Very cool.
Really inspired me. Yeah. And Going Infinite, Michael Lewis, he's the best author ever. It's not purely real estate, it's about crypto, but such a great book. Very inspiring, both the good and the bad, the lessons you learn. And that's about, honesty of being a good syndicator and steward of people's money means keeping track of it and, not losing the eye on the ball part of your business.
Absolutely. Well, let's give a little shout out because you've written 3 books. So I want to hear about Coffee Smuggler. I just love the title of it. Tell us a little bit about Coffee Smuggler.
Not many people know. It's a true story. If someone needs to make it into a movie. In 1727, a French soldier based in Martinique, Gabriel Declus, gets sent back to France and has the idea to introduce coffee to the Western Hemisphere. Colombia, Brazil have no coffee. No one has coffee. It can't grow there yet because the plant, comes, from the Middle East, and it's very hard to get it to grow. There's only one plant in all of France in the King's Botanical Garden, and he decides to steal it. And he finds a way to do that by seducing a noblewoman with a rare medical condition that allows, because she's a noble, her doctor has access to the Royal Botanical Garden. So she gets her doctor to go make a clipping of the coffee plant that Declus, plants and gets to start growing. He then escapes on a ship that gets attacked by the Barbary pirates. They survive, but then they get in the doldrums and run out of water, and he's giving his water ration to the plant, and everyone thinks he's crazy and is going to die. Then the wing picks back up. They get back to Martinique. He plants the plant. He starts a farm of coffee plants that succeeds in that climate. He was right all along. And he starts giving them away, and he never makes any money on it. And he eventually misses the sea, and he goes back and becomes a ship captain. And he lives to the age of 87 in France without any, he dies a poor man. But he brought us coffee, and it's the reason we drink, Arabica coffee so often nowadays.
Oh my goodness. And coffee prices are getting ridiculous lately. Oh my goodness gracious. Anyway, I digress, but what a very cool book. So thank you for sharing that. All right. The second A in Badass is for advice. You've given us great advice. Residents. I'm going to start calling them, my tenants residents from now on. But what's the best piece of advice you've ever received, Dave?
Take action.
I yell this to my students all the time. Yeah. I'm like, take action. Yes.
The perfect is the enemy of the good. Strive for good. I mean, strive for perfect, but don't insist on achieving it. The world is not built for perfectionists. You'll be very unhappy. I think you should try to be as perfect as you can be. And wisdom is knowing when to say, yep, good, good. Like, let's do that. And so I try to delegate things to my team that they can do and empower them to do work that I used to do myself. Because if you hold everything tightly and DIY everything, you can't scale, you can't grow. And that's okay for some people who may not want to grow. But if you do, you need to learn to essentially be a good boss and be a good leader and team builder and communicator to help other people help you.
My dear friend Cheryl O'Hearn always says, Jen, done is better than perfect. And I hear her all the time in my ear saying that. I don't know if she originated that, but I hear her saying that. So very well said. All right. The D in badass is for drive. What drives you to be successful?
I want to make other people happy, both on my team, in my units, in the community at large, because that makes me happy. So that drives me, a lot. And obviously, making money helps me do good things with that money, both for myself and my family and for my community, so that energizes me to keep things going.
Love it. All right. The second A in badass is for aspiration. I'm a big goal setter. So what is a goal you are currently working on?
That's a really good question. Part of why I'm here today talking with people is I really want to, reduce pollution, make the world a greener place. I believe in science. The thermometers are getting warmer. It was just 80 degrees here in October in Maine, which it should not be. And I think sharing, ways to use new technology responsibly. Not every building needs solar panels, but every building does need insulation. And how can we, do well by doing good that's both good for the bottom line of our businesses, that's efficient, which is the ultimate, kind of goal of most businesses, and is also good for the world around us.
Well, you are truly an inspiration in that genre of improving, and agreed. I do believe in science. Anyway, all right. The first S in badass is for systems. What systems do you have in place to help you achieve success?
I think one of the most critical ones is our property management software, which is kind of an everything suite. We use one called Appfolio. There's lots of others. I wouldn't even recommend it to someone starting out. It's definitely like you need some scale before you want to bother with something like Appfolio or Buildium, and there's others like that. But there's tons of ones for people that just have 5, 10, 20 units. And I think keeping your data there, being good about data cleanliness entry, it will save you so much headache and hassle in the long run, because you don't have to remember things and keep it all in your head. You can look back and see, oh, what did I pay for this? When did that happen? Is so-and-so missing X? And it's all there in that organized, centralized database that your team can access.
Huge. Well, Dave, I could talk to you all day, but the final S in badass is for success. What does success mean to Dave Holman?
It's when I'm happy and others are happy.
I love it. And I am happy to have met you, Dave. This has been such a fun interview. I love your energy. I know you're making such a huge difference up there in Maine. And again, one more time for the listeners, how do they find you?
You just shout my name 3 times and I'll appear. So holmanhomes.com. You can reach me through the website or the email or phone that I gave earlier, and would love to connect.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for being with us today. This was so much fun. I really, truly appreciate you.
Back at you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And that is all. Thank you for listening. And we will catch you on the next episode. Now go out there and share your badassery. And don't forget, make it a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Whoop, whoop.
Thank you for listening to Rain, the